Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our researcher hats and we're diving straight into a purely rational investigation. We're asking a pretty provocative question here. Do ancient religious texts actually demand blind faith? Or could it be that they champion critical, independent reasoning? We're going to treat our source text, the Quran, not as some untouchable theological sacred cow, but as a rigorous epistemological document. We're going to map out a step-by-step breakdown, really comparing collective consensus right up against individual reason, just to see what the text itself actually argues. Okay, so let's dive right into this by speaking directly to the skeptics out there. If you've ever assumed that Islam is basically just a ritualistic institution founded by an Arab named Muhammad in the 6th century, well, you're absolutely not alone. That is literally the dominant historical narrative taught all around the world. But here's the really surprising twist. What if the source text itself explicitly warns us against following exactly that kind of inherited majority consensus?
Now, what's absolutely fascinating is how the text immediately completely upends that common historical assumption. It fundamentally challenges the whole concept of identity-based religion. So the text doesn't actually present this newly invented sectarian institution starting with one specific ethnic group. Nope. Instead, it describes this universal, continuous state of alignment with truth. We're talking about something rooted in creation itself, confirmed through rigorous reasoning, way before the 6th century.
So here's our investigator's roadmap for this explainer. 1. The problem with majority consensus. 2. Grounded knowledge versus inherited assumption. 3. The danger of distracting narratives. 4. The myth of human exceptionalism. And 5. Discovering truth through innate reason. Let's get into it.
Starting with Section 1, the problem with majority consensus. Let's tackle our first major hurdle here, which is this deeply ingrained human tendency we all have to just trust the crowd over objective reality. The source text repeatedly contrasts actual grounded knowledge with something called zann. Now, think of a courtroom setting. The text basically treats on exactly like hearsay. It represents an inherited, completely unverified assumption that would be totally inadmissible if we were searching for actual, verified truth. I mean, it's the ultimate intellectual trap, right? Building your entire worldview on hearsay. And yet, crazily enough, that is exactly what majorities tend to build their worldviews upon. And that perfectly sets up the danger of a related concept, yakhrusun. Now, this isn't just everyday lying in some simple moral sense. It's actually that very human habit of constructing unquestionable certainty out of pure, unadulterated speculation and then fiercely defending it as somehow sacred. It's the act of guessing, estimating without any real certainty, and then taking those unverified assumptions and institutionalizing them into absolute dogma. So the absolutely crucial point here is that when the text warns against following the majority of people on Earth, it's not saying the majority is morally bad or unintelligent, not at all. It's warning us of an epistemological danger. It's laying out a logical sequence. Truth simply isn't determined by popularity. Inherited certainty usually rests on mere assumption. Humans then convert those assumptions into unquestionable doctrine. So mathematically speaking, following collective conjecture literally leads you straight away from objective truth. Moving right along to Section 2, grounded knowledge versus inherited assumption. Let's enter the second phase of our investigation and see how this builds into a really stark contrast between actual grounded knowledge and just mere inherited labels. If we take a look at how the text treats historical figures, we find a massive disruption of the traditional narrative. By asserting that Abraham was a quote-unquote Muslim centuries before the 6th century, the text isn't, time-traveling a religion. It's actually utilizing the literal definition of the word, meaning one who is aligned with truth. It completely destabilizes the idea of an exclusive institution. It's arguing that being aligned with truth is a state of being based on grounded knowledge. It's definitely not some tribal or sectarian membership card you just passively inherit from your parents. Which brings us to Section 3. The danger of distracting narratives. Now, if the original message was this universal, logical alignment with reality, we've got to ask a pretty critical question. How do human institutions manage to distort it so thoroughly over time? Well, the text answers this by pointing out a really powerful psychological tool, l-lahi. Now, here is a surprising twist. While later sectarian traditions often reduce this term down to just mean music or singing, looking at the linguistic roots reveals a much deeper, way more dangerous epistemological decoy. It literally means distracting discourse, We're talking about emotionally compelling, mythologized stories that just captivate people and actively replace their direct engagement with reality.
It's exactly like a giant historical game of telephone, spanning centuries. First, a speculative narrative is constructed. Second, it emotionally captivates a society, because let's face it, we all love a good story. Third, it distracts from the really hard work of direct engagement with truth and accountability. Fourth, it leads people away from the universal path of reason. And finally, it hardens into an institution that actively defends this distraction as untouchable dogma. It basically shows exactly why communities will almost always favor comfort over truth.
All right, Section 4, the myth of human exceptionalism. This brings us to a very specific, recurring human flaw that basically puts this game of telephone into overdrive, our desperate desire to create sacred intermediaries. This specific verse hits the nail on the head regarding exactly what modern skeptics criticize about religion. It describes how humans will take equal mortal servants and just invent a special divided share of the divine for them. Instead of accepting basic existential equality, humans much prefer to elevate certain figures into cosmic exceptions. And doing that effectively mythologizes history and covers over the plain, simple reality that all humans are just mortal servants, no exceptions. The text is arguing that elevating humans to superhuman status isn't just a theological error. It is a massive, critical failure of objective reasoning. It's driven by what the text calls hawa, which is subjective emotional bias and inclination. So when a community decides to make a human a cosmic favorite, that subjective bias completely replaces principled alignment to reality. Inherited loyalty and personality cults just start to eclipse the actual grounded pursuit of truth and justice. And that takes us to Section 5, discovering truth through innate reason. So now that we've mapped exactly how institutions and human biases corrupt the truth, how does a rational person actually navigate their way back to grounded reality? Well, unlike systems that demand blind faith, the text constantly, and I mean constantly, demands independent observation of nature, history, and cause and effect. It repeatedly asks things like, will you not reason and will you not reflect? It's a pretty blunt reminder. Truth is never meant to be hidden behind some elite priesthood or an exclusive institution. Discernment requires active cognition. It's a fundamental responsibility placed directly on your shoulders as an individual to actually observe reality. And all of this builds into the ultimate antidote, l-lahi. This concept essentially tells us that the underlying order of reality is not arbitrary, and every single human possesses the innate, logical capacity to recognize it. You don't need an institution to hold your hand. You need sincere observation of the created order. You need active reflection over passive inheritance. You absolutely must maintain independence from collective pressure and majority assumptions. And you got to prioritize justice and accountability over your emotional or tribal loyalties. For sure, that is the only way you bypass institutional conjecture. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought. If we actually take this epistemological framework seriously, we have to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Is the worldview you cling to actually built on grounded, objective evidence and your own active reasoning? Or are you, like so many before us, just recycling the emotionally comforting, mythologized assumptions of the crowd? It's definitely a challenging question, but honestly, asking it is the very first step toward finding grounded truth.